Good evening. Welcome to the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. I'm Diane Sayre, LaRouche candidate for U.S. Senate in New York, challenging Chuck Schumer in the November 2022 elections. And tonight's show, and this is June 3rd, tonight's program I actually wanted to dedicate to answering a question that many people have asked me, which is, what is the significance of Lyndon LaRouche, who was arguably the greatest genius produced by the United States thus far, born in 1922, 100 years ago this year, and passed away in 2019. So what I wanted to do is go immediately to a clip from a meeting that I did with Mr. LaRouche and other candidates, LaRouche candidates, on President's Day weekend of 2012. So about 10 years ago and a few months. And I think you'll find what he had to say at that meeting quite striking. Good afternoon, and I'm Diane Sayre, the LaRouche candidate from the slate of 6 so far in the state of New Jersey, introducing our live webcast with Mr. LaRouche.
Well, good afternoon, and let's hope it is a good afternoon. The main thing is we're virtually on the edge of a global thermonuclear war. Unless action is taken tantamount to the removal of President Barack Obama from office in the near future. It probably will be the case that the launching of this thermonuclear war, which will mean the full capability of the submarine fleet of the United States in the Pacific and other regions, which will be an extermination warfare, and Russia is prepared, and probably China too, to react on the instant that they see the launches occurring from the United States and British forces, which means there is some question as to how much of the human species and the nations of the world will survive that event. Now, that event is probably now, it was scheduled for an earlier time, but responsible people in our military had blocked the launching of this war. Others had been blocking it, but it's still on. And Obama, as long as Obama remains president of the United States, it is likely that this or something like it may occur soon. We're talking about the month of March, something in the month of March. It could be later. These things are not certain. What is certain is that the British Empire and President Obama are committed to this action. It can be stopped from within the United States. Other circumstances could stop it, but we're on the urge of its happening. Now, at the same time, the transatlantic region of the world is in a breakdown crisis. We have a hyperinflationary accumulation of worthless money. And we're at the edge where all of that money may be canceled in general background at any time. Now, there are only two remedies for the threat, the economic threat to the transatlantic region, including the people of the United States. On the one hand, we're faced with the immediate worthlessness of all the bailout money, which means that the only way we can save the United States from an imminent collapse, that is complete total breakdown where money becomes worthless, and a similar situation exists in Europe at this time. The only way we can stop that is with Glass-Steagall. The emergency inaction of Glass-Steagall will save the United States from an immediate collapse. If Glass-Steagall is not installed immediately in this period, we're approaching the point where all of Europe or at least all of Western and Central Europe, and the United States are simultaneously on the verge of a general breakdown where money is toilet paper. That's the situation. The debts of the United States, the debts of the U.S. government, the debts of the European government can never be paid. The stuff is worthless, is totally arbitrary. Therefore, if we apply Glass-Steagall in the United States, we'll force the same kind of action in Europe. That action of a Glass-Steagall action by the governments of Europe and the United States and other places will stop the crisis. It will not solve the problem. It will stop the crisis. Right? Now, what has to be done then is we have to also change our banking system in general. We can stabilize the situation with Glass-Steagall. Without Glass-Steagall, the economic situation of the United States and its people is hopeless. Hopeless. There are no alternatives to Glass-Steagall. They don't exist. And Europe is in a similar situation, especially continental Europe and Central and Western Europe, are about to collapse. It's just a matter of how long can they hold it off. But the collapse is here. The assets of the Federal Reserve System are worthless. They could never be paid. And this happened mostly since late 2008. We're now in a hopeless situation. But Glass-Steagall, by canceling the obligations of debts which are not in the responsibility of the U.S. government traditionally, by going back to Glass-Steagall, we could prevent a collapse. But we could not cause a genuine recovery by that means. What we need, apart from worthless kinds of investments, which is now characteristic, if we go to large projects which include the development of NWAPA, that is the famous NWAPA system which was killed when Jack Kennedy was killed, because Kennedy was moving in the direction of the endorsement of Glass-Steagall. There would have been 14 million jobs. We have similar kinds of projects which are waiting. We need the credit system which can do that job, give those jobs, real jobs, not the make-work jobs. And that's possible. The United States could do it. All we have to do, Glass-Steagall liberates us to do something, but we cannot have sufficient funding of these projects on the basis of the funds available after a Glass-Steagall purge, which means we have to go to a credit system, which is in our Constitution originally anyway. And that system means that we have the possibility of a normal, full-scale recovery based on large-scale jobs, like NWAPA. 14 million people jobs just for that, with other jobs coming out of that, which means we can start a general recovery. There are other programs of similar effect. And if they instituted, we can start a general recovery of the United States immediately. It won't be sweet and pleasant all at once, but we will be safe and we will be recovering. And the desperation that we face now will not exist. So those are the options. We have on the one hand, the British monarchy is going for this thing, and the British monarchy owns the President of the United States. That's a fact. It's not a debate. That's a fact. And so by dealing with these problems, we then create the kind of situation we need. We're going to have under these circumstances, we'll have cooperation from Russia, from China, from India, and from other countries in Asia, and other countries in other parts of the world. And we can start to think about a genuine rebuilding of the economy of the world. And that's before us. We also have a wonderful opportunity really before us, which is being killed by Obama and the British. The United States was about ready to start a process of developing the moon, which would lead into about 2 generations or less, perhaps, into the man's beginning to colonize Mars. The colonization of Mars is a feasible conception. There are difficulties which would have to be dealt with before reaching that point. We have, say, 1.5 or 2 generations to prepare for that kind of job. We already have, scientifically, the capability to transport a human being, say from either Mars or professionally from the moon itself, to Mars and we can do that in about a week. We now have the technology, which is not yet developed, but it exists as a scientific capability. We have the capability. So somewhere between a generation and a half or 2 generations, that mankind can travel from Earth, Moon to Mars in 1 week. We have that technology. It's there, it's scientifically there, it has to be developed. But we have time to do it. We also have a problem. The Mars trip is not just a junket. It's not just a stunt. We have threats to humanity, like something that nearly happened but didn't happen, that in large bodies, like asteroids, large asteroids, if they hit the Earth, can either destroy most of the human population or all of it. This is a threat. So therefore we have, in addition to the accomplishment of traveling to Mars, we have also the challenge of preparing to defend life on Earth, human life in particular on Earth, from something that will sooner or later hit. So we need to develop the space program as a program of defense. Now, the defense, if you go out far enough, say toward the direction of Jupiter or the direction of Saturn or something like that, you go out far enough, you can actually alter the motion of one of these asteroids if it's about to hit Earth. And you can, a relatively minimal amount of effort would be sufficient to do that. But we need to have a system which detects and enables us to deploy means to defend the existence of human life on Earth from this kind of process. We also have the possibility of some of the greatest things that could be done by mankind will be done. And that's something I can get into otherwise. But the point is to make the point. We have the alternative. We have before us the greatest disaster that humanity has ever conceived of. That's the one side. That's the Obama side. We also have at the same time the option of mobilizing our economy with the kind of projects we used to admire in our national policy under Franklin Roosevelt and still under Jack Kennedy. This is our choice. Obama is death. The British monarchy is death. A return to our tradition as Americans, our United States, our cooperation with powerful nations such as Russia, China, India, so forth, Japan, Korea, are nations ready to cooperate with us in these kinds of projects. We have a choice. Under Obama, you have no choice. None.
So I'd like to bring up my co-host, Dennis Speed, who is the moderator for LaRouche's Manhattan Project. And Dennis, I'm sure you have some thoughts. I think this is very striking. He might have said it yesterday. But in case people don't remember this was February 2012, what had occurred was it it was August. When was Gaddafi killed? August of 2011? Yeah. So when Gaddafi was assassinated, people may remember Hillary Clinton's hideously ugly cackling about that. But LaRouche warned, he said, this is not about Libya or even Syria, which is next. He said, we are on a trajectory to nuclear war. And what did Obama go on to do? Obama and Biden, but in 2013 and 2014, the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, they poured $5 billion into operations in Ukraine to overthrow the elected government, to create the conditions for exactly what we see today, when we are definitely on the brink of thermonuclear war. We had a reprieve from that in the Trump administration, and people screamed bloody murder about Trump's alleged collusion with Russia, or Russia's interference in the US elections in 2016. Now we are back in that threat even nearer with the sale of these HIMARS missiles, or sale, donation, or whatever we're doing to Ukraine, which can shoot up to 50 miles into the border within Russia. That's the fear of anyone who's sane. Also, we have our director of cyber warfare bragging in a public interview that the United States is actively conducting cyber warfare against Russia right now. Um, Now, if John McCain thought that the alleged meddling of the Russians into the US elections, which was never proven, was an act of war, what do you call deliberate cyber warfare against Russia? And then just the last point on the British, um, our dear Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, was falling all over himself to praise the Queen on her Jubilee Platinum Jubilee, the 70 years of service. He calls it service to the United Kingdom. I would say it's other people serving the Queen. And he says, quote, Her Majesty's unprecedented 70 years of service to the United Kingdom are an inspiration to Americans who deeply admire the Queen and are grateful for her decades of friendship with the United States. And he went on to say, through our special relationship, common history, and shared values, we work together to uphold democracy, human rights, and the rule of law worldwide, unquote. So George Washington, Alexander Hamilton Ben Franklin would be turning over in their graves at these comments. But again, it just shows how much Lyndon LaRouche was on the mark 10 years ago.
I guess what I'd like to say, because I think we have some other footage from Lynn, this being, of course, the 100th anniversary of his birth. It's also the 100th anniversary of the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial. And Lynn very much thought of himself in terms of the presidential campaigns that he ran. He was running a campaign very much in the image of someone like Abraham Lincoln. What I mean by that is that the crisis that existed in the country at the time that Lincoln ran for office was of such a nature that his election precipitated the secession by 7 states of the Union before he became president. In other words, the very idea merely that he got elected uh, seemed to catapult 7 states out of the Union. It wasn't that Lincoln did it. In fact, Lincoln's point was that these states had committed something illegal, that the idea of leaving the United States was not an option for any state. States do not have the right to do that because there's a single republic called the United States. So he never even accepted the concept, really, of a civil war. He did use the term in the Gettysburg Address, but he always referred to the war as the War of the Rebellion against the Union. In the same vein, Lyndon LaRouche sought to reestablish the American system of physical economy, but he had also advanced that system. And I think what we were hearing in some of the remarks he made there were the things that he thought about. Let's just take a few things about the obvious fact that he referenced Obama. People might say, well, wait a minute, he was saying there could be a thermonuclear war during the Obama administration. That didn't occur. Well, what did occur during that administration? One of the things that occurred was that there was a coup made in Ukraine in 2014. And the persons who supervised that coup, or at least were the persons involved in the negotiations, were one Joe Biden and someone else by the name of Victoria Nuland. If you look at the circumstance that now exists in what we're referring to as the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this is a circumstance that came about during the second administration of the Obama presidency. But even at the time that we are talking, in front of us was about to be, or rather, coming after that point of this. I believe this was in February. By that September, Benghazi would happen, in which the United States would lose its ambassador, and more importantly, we would lose Libya. The nation of Libya was disintegrated by the attack that the United States and ostensibly NATO made, which ended up with the assassination of Gaddafi. But more importantly, as LaRouche said at that point, that was the beginning of the war with Russia. For many, many years, people have wondered what that meant. But I think what you see or what you hear and what he had to say about the issue of the economy is really central. He said that the debt of the United States, the debt of Europe could never be repaid. He talked about hyperinflation. When LaRouche would do that back then, everybody would say, these things never happen. He says these things are going to happen, but they don't happen. Well, you're paying $7 a gallon for gas in some parts of the country, $6 in other parts, $5 if you're lucky. But that has nothing to do with the cost of production. It has to do with the cost of speculation. And then, of course, there's food. We don't even have baby formula for people in the United States, but we can send $60 billion to Ukraine, the equivalent of the entire Russian military budget. And that can be done instantaneously. And the idea is that the American people and others are being told in Germany or Italy or otherwise that they're sacrificing for the greater good of democracy, which they are defending in the form of defending the illegal coup conducted under the Obama administration against the duly elected, democratically elected government of Yanukovych of Ukraine, which would have been up for election. But instead, Victoria Nuland and others oversaw a coup. We all know about Donald Trump being accused of being a Russian agent. We all know that ended up being proven to not be true. It is still contended that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. That's actually also not true. But that's the basis of right now, today, the present director of the National Security Agency, Nakasone, having admitted only over the last couple of days that the United States has been involved in cyber warfare directly against Russia. So all that talk about the United States is not involved in the war against Russia is bunk. He admitted this 2 days ago, saying that since December of 2021, for a 3-month period, that the United States was deployed directly with Ukraine, conducting cyber warfare of an offensive variety against Russia. So now we have a problem because you're sending long-range missiles or relatively long-range missiles to Ukraine, which is telling Russia they're not going to use them. The same Ukraine that has told Russia several things several times and then reneged. And the premise is, well, they've told us also they're not going to do it, so we're going to believe them. But if they use those weapons, as was said by former President Medvedev of Russia, the Russian military would have to, essentially is obligated to respond to the actual nations that attacked them. That would be the United States. So does that mean thermonuclear exchange? People, of course, believe that this isn't true because it's so horrific. But actually, that is not what determines this. What determines this is that the bankruptcy of the transatlantic system is so great that there's no way out of this. And that's the actual impulse behind this entire business. Not Ukraine, not Russia, but the bankruptcy of the transatlantic system. And this is the point of power in which Lyndon LaRouche was unique. He insisted on these things. And I think as we are talking tonight, now that we have secured, from anything we know, our position on the ballot for the United States Senate for the race against Chuck Schumer, these are matters that we can actually raise in a way that the American people can discuss. And I think that's a very important achievement of what has happened with this campaign.
I agree. Well, let's hear what Lynn has to say next, which builds on some of what he began with here. This is from a speech he gave in Germany in 2013.
I don't know, that was a promotion, a demotion, or a sidewise motion. This is truly the most important of all strategic questions we have to face today. The fact that the human species, which is absolutely unique in its capabilities, there's no other known species in the universe ever known to have existed or could exist, even though we have not fully explored, of course, the Crab Nebula or similar parts of the great galaxy which we're involved in, called the Milky Way. There may be many species with cognitive powers out there because the solar system, of which we are immediately a product, though always under the control of the galactic processes. And we know a good deal today about those kinds of things. Our organization in the United States has spent a good deal of effort on concentrating inclusively on just this question: how old is life? How long has life existed in this galaxy, or within it, some place in it? What is the nature of mankind, who's been on this planet only for a few million years? There was no human being on this planet, to the best of our knowledge, until a few million years ago. And yet, we're talking about billions of years of this galaxy, during which all living processes known to us have come into existence. And all life is creative, but there's a sad part, that over 95% of all known living species have been rendered extinct as failures in their time. The question, therefore, why, in these times, when we've entered a period in which there will be more great kills of living processes at this phase of the movement of the solar system through the galaxy, why should we be so presumptuous as to imagine that human life is not about to disappear as the dinosaurs did in the last great kill? What is there about human beings that says they're not just another animal species ready to get to the chop in the course of their time? The answer is a very little known question. Most people don't have an inkling of what the answer is. As a matter of fact, our societies are run on the basis of people who have no inkling what the human species is. All they can come up with is an explanation of some kind of an animal, with animal characteristics, of pleasure and pain and things like that, that might control the behavior of this animal. So why should we expect that we have a right to claim that the human species is going to survive the approaching point of a great kill in the course of the movements of the solar system up and below and around the galaxy we inhabit? How do we know that this 62 million year cycle is not going to take the human species away, as it's taken so many away before, and then before that, and then before that? And here you all these people talking about politics, they're talking about issues of politics, they're talking about practical opinion and public opinion and differentiations and costumes and all those kinds of things. And here we are, we're approaching the time of the great kill where everything about us may suddenly disappear. So what are we worried about? If we're going to disappear, why do we worry? Why do we fight it? What is there in us that is not in other living species known to us, that might somehow miraculously pronounce a destiny for our human species which we grant to no other living species? The name for that specific quality which we know in the human species, which does not exist in any other known living species, is a quality of creativity which is absolutely unique to mankind. And if you're not creative, and if you don't understand creativity, you haven't got a ticket to survival yet. Because creativity won't save you unless you use it. All you have to do is adopt a zero growth policy, a zero technological growth policy. I can guarantee you, your extinction will come deliberately on time. I don't know what the time is, but it's soon, in terms of geological and galactic time. So what are you living for? Why do you believe there's a future for your species? Why do you believe you should have grandchildren? Why should you exist? Now, how often do you hear the question which I have just posed discussed in policy making of nations? Here we are, the most important thing for any species to consider, its extinction and the possibility of not becoming extinct. A possibility known to us, or can be known to us if we're not stubbornly opposed to learning it, which is called human creativity, a phenomenon which does not exist as human creativity, as willful creativity in any other known species that ever lived to our knowledge. The human species, which has lived on this planet only a few million years, has a certain quality which no other known species of life has ever demonstrated. And unfortunately, among human beings, there's a very limited interest in the subject. They talk about creativity in all kinds of things. A different design of garment, for example. A different design recipe for cooking. These are all considered inventions or discoveries of principle. They're not. Whether you wear your skirts upside down or not is irrelevant to the question of species existence. It may be entertaining, but it doesn't have much pertinence to species existence. But there is a quality in mankind which we know and can know very well if we choose to do so, of genuine creativity. Now, first of all life is creative. All forms of life are creative. They are created as such. Everyone we know about was created. It was created as a qualitative differentiation from other kinds of species. It was not necessarily created in a single line of creation. There are many complicated kinds of ways in which breeding of species occurs and crossbreeding of species occurs. And there are derivations of new species occurs. These were things that we have studied in the basement, for example, in the history of the life on this planet and in this galaxy as far as we know it. But the point is, every animal is species. Species is creative. But they are not voluntarily creative. The creativity is built into them. They're not conscious of it. They can't control it. They can't choose creativities. Creativity chooses them. And when you get a great kill, you get a point that the ability of animals. Look, but most of the animals we have today on this planet should be extinct but for mankind. Why do we have animals? Because we promote, artificially so to speak, we promote their existence on this planet. We want cattle, we raise cattle. You want milk? Raise cows. If you don't raise cows, to hell with you, you get no milk. All our foodstuffs and many other things about animal life and plant life are things that mankind chooses and recognizes as necessary to mankind and cultivates and uses those things which are useful to mankind. So that's animal creativity. The potentiality of discoveries by a living species, rather than human, is built into the design of the human species. And when a great kill comes of some species or some set of species, it's because that animal species has run out of options for adapting to the new circumstances. Now, there's another aspect of this process which is most crucial for understanding what I've just said. That the existence of life and specifically human life on this planet, depends upon a natural degree of creativity. That is, an upward quality of evolution. Now, you have behavioral evolution in forms of adaptation. This occurs in the creation of new states of nature, automatically. Animal life, plant life do this. But then you come to the point that that whole system has come to a categorical close by the introduction of either exhaustion of resources of a certain kind or a new condition in the galaxy, like a galactic period, when our solar system goes through a different arm of the galaxy, or when the solar system moves above the level of the galaxy as opposed to being below it where it's more protected. And so the point is, we find that in order for mankind to live, we have to increase what's called the energy flux density of mankind's willful change in the character of the environment. That is, for example, mankind is distinguished from other species, first of all, by the voluntary use of fire. No animal, member of the animal kingdom, no tree, no form of plant life ever willfully set fire to itself. So the characteristic of mankind has been going from the simple burning of things to assist human existence to going to higher forms of combustion. We went from burning shrubbery, which is probably our most ancient ancestors did as our species. We went to charcoal and so forth. We went up to combustion of coal, of coke, and so forth. And all the way, each of these steps on which the progress of human existence has depended has gone to a higher level of what is called energy flux density. That is the cross-sectional temperature at which combustion occurs. And the ability to maintain human life and to maintain the growth and extension of the human species depends on going to constantly higher levels of what we call energy flux density. Now, we have recently entered a period in which the continuation of human life on this planet, even without any galactic changes, absolutely requires not only nuclear fission as a basic source of power to be applied to the needs of life. We've now entered a period where nuclear fission power by itself is no longer sufficient. We now have entered a period where for mankind to survive, we must begin to operate on thermonuclear fusion as a power source. And beyond that, we must look forward to developing access to another technology, which is called matter-atom reactor. These are all characterized by the cross-sectional value of heat is increased in intensity. So a society which is going to windmills is a doomed society. A windmill society is a mass suicide society.
Very good place to stop. People can look for that. As you may have seen, I was mistaken. I guess the recording of the video was putting it on YouTube was 2013, but the conference was actually 2011. So Dennis, I'll go to you.
Well, I think there's an important corollary point that the idea that people have of democracy as it is being presently promulgated is not different than the idea of Malthusianism. And here's how it works. The notion that people are given is that everything is equal to everything else. So if you happen to have a transgender or you're this or you're that, you can't make any differences between anything, or the differences are equivalent. And when you talk about voting or you talk about programs or policies for society, the idea is you have to start from the various interest groups and then find what is equivalent for all of the interest groups, then solve the problem of each interest group's interest, as opposed to being able to identify an interest for the human race as a whole. Because if you try to introduce the idea of the human race as a whole, that's an abstraction because there are these different parts of the human race. So if you say the human race has to go in this direction, and you then say that is a higher direction than where we are as a human race, that is authoritarian. You are not allowed to do that. Not allowed to do that because now you are presuming to make policy for different interest groups. After all, you're only part of one interest group. And if you that may be because you're from the United States as opposed to from Botswana, or it may be that because you're heterosexual as opposed to not, or something else. So what's interesting here is this idea, for example, that the United States itself is a democracy, which it is not. The United States would never have succeeded as a society if it had been a democracy, because democracies in general are failures. That's not because of the idea of the lack of human rights. That's because of the problem that, as was discovered by the founders of the nation, you've got to have an idea of a sovereign, independent republic with its own banking system, credit system, and approach to using discoveries and inventions to advance the power of that society to reproduce not only more and more human beings within that society, but reproduce creative people. Like LaRouche said, I think his identification of this idea of human creativity as different than animal creativity, which is built into animals, but human creativity is voluntary, is, if you check it out, exactly what's being attacked by the people with the Green New Deal. How come these people have not known what many of us knew ever since the 1970s for 50 years? That if you thought you were having a problem with something like carbon dioxide, which, by the way, I don't acknowledge as a problem, but for people who thought they were having the problem, how do you not know you go to to nuclear fission and thermonuclear fusion? How do you find that out now when, in fact, these technologies were developed in the 1940s and 50s in terms of at least their scientific principles? And now you say, let's go to solar and wind, even in the middle of recognizing that right now, as that's being done in Germany, in Italy, and also in the United States, where you can see plenty of windmills if you go upstate New York right now, replacing the Indian Point nuclear power plant, for example, in New York, which it cannot do. They can't produce the same amount of energy. So the trajectory that he outlines there is exactly what we've got to have a dialogue, a discussion with the American people about. And I think your campaign, Diane, is going to be a vehicle for that. I think also it's important that we just think through for young people. How would you not conclude that the despair felt by the shooters that we all denounce as shooters, but how can you deny that the despair that they feel is not justified by this no win, no future outlook that has been foisted upon them by the present way in which we see our society? I think we have to reverse these things. And I think what LaRouche just outlined gives us a way to think about how to do that.
Yeah, I was reflecting, first of all, that in the second speech, he was 89 years old. In the first speech, he was 90 years old. His clarity, but also what he represents, as you remember, he used to often say, sometimes he would say he was 200 years old, sometimes he would say he was 2,500 years old. Having an identity which is very conscious of one's origins. That is not specifically like a genetic DNA thing, but the development of mankind through discoveries, going back to Socrates and Plato, or going back to Confucius, or going back to Tilak. Uh, this is what we each actually are part of, which also is the thing that many people tend not to reflect on. If there were to be a thermonuclear war, or if there were to be an extinction event, as he says, like an asteroid or comet hitting the Earth, or what will eventually happen to the planet unless we figure out a way to cause the sun to live longer with our fusion experiments, or we get out of the solar system in a few billions of years. If this species is annihilated in such an event, you lose the discoveries, you lose this incredible legacy, which is not something physical in that sense, but it is very much alive as the human species is alive. The other thing I was reflecting on is what you said about this authoritarian question, where people are really taught that, well, how can you say a human being is superior to an animal? Well, in a way, we don't have to say that. The universe says it, because we are a species that doesn't have to go extinct. We actually improve our species as a matter of will because of being made in the image of the creator. The creativity that we are endowed with means that there is no need for our species to ever go extinct. That is not the case. And he made the point with the animals that might have gone extinct, like cows. I don't know that they have any features or insightful characteristics that without mankind they would be doing anything different than what they were doing 4,000 years ago. You don't see them operating tractors or producing their own food. So they are there because of what we have done. So not only do we improve the environment for human life, we actually improve the environment for other species. And that you can see there is no other species that is capable of making it possible for that species to have, in a sense, a limitless possibility of growth.
Well, I think there's also an interesting question about whether or not the responsibility of the human race is in any sense able to be limited to the human race. I mean, suppose it were the case, because we don't know, right, that life has been extinguished in other parts of the galaxy or other galaxies exactly because idiot people like creatures screwed up and destroyed themselves, and that in fact the reason that we don't have any evidence of life in this part of the galaxy other than our own scientific limitations is maybe it's not there because it eliminated itself. We don't know what happened on the planet Mars, for example. We don't know much about anything. So that our responsibility might be that we have to explore the universe or do get off the Earth, which is in sort of the hinterlands kind of suburban part of this present galaxy, in order to propagate life on other planets. Sort of like a farmer who, spreads seeds around, and that our job is to take the life that's here, not merely our own, but the life and life forms that can be, in fact, generated on other planets. How do we know that's not what our actual imperative is? So there's a lot of reasons to think that the way the present politics, as he said, which doesn't even think about creativity or this idea of fundamental creativity, is, this is a discussion that I think the American people would love to have. Certainly, young people would love to have it. Matter of fact, there's right now some things going on in China around thermonuclear fusion. I think there's just a 3-minute video somebody just put up of a young Chinese scientist who's working with 800 other people. And they're talking about trying to achieve thermonuclear fusion for commercially available energy within the next generation. So that's a real prospect. And I think he talks about it as though you're climbing a mountain with a lot of other people and you're doing it just to see the best possible sunrise. And that kind of optimism is what I think we want to have our young people have in this country as well.
Yeah, what you were saying brought to mind Kraft Erica, a great space scientist and friend of Mr. LaRouche, who said, one, if God intended for man to be a spacefaring species, he would have given us a moon. And then when talking about the moon, he said, well, isn't it interesting that the moon's gravitational pull is 1/6 that of the Earth and not the other way around. So when you fly to the moon, if the gravitational pull of the moon were 6 times that of Earth, you'd land and be a pancake, and that would be the end of it. And it would be very hard to get back. But as it turns out, the gravitational field of the moon is much smaller than that of Earth, so that the moon is a perfect launch pad for us to explore farther into space. And I think many of the scientists who work in this have similar views. They're very, very conscious of the non entropic development of the biosphere, indicating exactly that trend, and therefore mankind, contrary to being anti natural or unnatural, actually, the development of the mind, the development of what Vernadsky called the noosphere, is the most natural thing. It is part of the development of the universe, and we can participate and enhance that development of the universe.
I wanted to ask you a question, by the way, because I think it might be interesting for people reviewing. In the course of the last 5 weeks or so of the petitioning and the gathering of petitions and going all over the state, because you've seen more of it than pretty much anybody, what was for you the most encouraging thing you saw, and what was for you the most alarming thing that you think has to be addressed, both either in the candidacy or in the course uh, of getting people involved in the campaign?
Well, the most encouraging thing was the campuses I was on, particularly University of Buffalo and Binghamton, where they have very robust programs in engineering. And the young people that I met there were very optimistic. And even those who weren't studying engineering or neurobiology or nuclear engineering or aerospace or something like that. A lot of them were. But for example, I met a young man who said he was studying, I think, medical administration. And you might think, well, that's kind of boring or what. And I said to him, I'm very concerned about what's happening in our nursing homes. They are being privatized for profit. And the thing that's the most profitable is to kill people, to let them die. And he got extremely impassioned. He said, that's why I wanted to go into this. I guess he had a double major, public health and medical administration or something. He said, that's why I'm doing this, because I want to stop that. And I just thought, wow. But he needs us, he needs a movement to ensure that when he graduates, he can do what he said and he's not just crushed and turned into a broken, pessimistic person after this. So, both campuses, I was really thrilled because you see, we have the potential, we have people who are interested in learning these things, and if our nation had a mission, we could we could pull this together very quickly. Um, the thing that was shocking, I have to say, is every time I come back to Manhattan, the city is filthy. People are destroyed. You see so much mental illness on the streets. It's as if you have a caste system. We have a caste system here in the United States where certain people are just declared to be, I don't know, human waste or something. And they're human beings who have a potential. If our nation had a mission, we would desperately need them to be developing their talents. We wouldn't see it as an expense. People say, oh, how can you afford to put people in a, give them, build a mental hospital? How can you afford for people to have housing? Well, I don't know. We just sent $40 billion to Nazis in Ukraine, or we've spent $70 billion bailing out AIG, and we did it 3 times in a row. So you see, it's really not about money. But I must say, every time I come back into Manhattan, just driving down that ramp onto the Harlem River Drive after you cross the George Washington Bridge, and it's so full of potholes, and you say, was there a war here? Um, it's really jarring.
Yeah. The other thing I thought you might want to say, because you also were in mosques in various parts of the country, you were in farm areas. You saw the different cities, I think Albany, Syracuse, and of course, you just referenced Manhattan. You've talked to all sorts of people. What do you, because, and very few people get a chance to do that. so that there's a sense that people have that some group thinks something which is not necessarily what that group thinks at all. What's your sense of the people sort of taken as a whole that you were talking to, and the real differences or not, or the lack of real differences?
Well, I think there's actually much more potential for people to be united. After 9/11, there was a huge surge in Islamophobia. Um, and you get some of that. There was some of that from people who said they were Trump supporters or whatever, this whole anti immigrant operation. But I actually find most Americans are not. I thought people might react when I said that I had spoken at so many mosques, and people actually are very interested in that. They're not surprised. And the people at the mosques are, they've really been through a lot since 9/11, a lot of, what is the word I'm looking for? Prejudiced treatment, but they're not bitter. And I think there's enormous, look, we're in this together. It doesn't matter what your religion is or your skin color, you're still going to be paying $7 a gallon for gasoline, or not be able to pay for groceries when you get out of the grocery store. And that's really why I wanted to run as an independent candidate or unaffiliated, because I think the party system, as LaRouche said on his 90th birthday, is dead. It's finished. It fulfilled exactly what George Washington warned that it would do, which is that people became loyal to their party over the interests of the people of the United States, or the United States as a whole. And I think there's enormous potential for people to be unified on matters of principle, which will affect the lives of their children and grandchildren.
Last thing I guess I'll ask, and then you probably want to wind up, is uh, what are you thinking you're going to do now that presumably the process is over of our getting onto the ballot?
Well, provided no challenge emerges, and it's looking pretty good so far. Um, and I think we did a very good job on the petitioning. I'd really like to thank everyone who was involved in that. We did a tremendous job, uh, better than many others that I've looked at. It was hard work. People worked hard. We have to be visible. Anyone who's interested in coming out in the streets and organizing with my campaign, you can sign up at sareforsenate.com. I'll put the link in the chat on Facebook and YouTube. I would appreciate donations. We want to do campaigns of radio ads, billboards, everything to keep this campaign visible. I am quite certain that the New York Times is not about to start giving coverage to my campaign, nor is Fox News or anybody else. And I think if we're out there, we're going to recruit and grow. I think we have to fight for these policies. We are on the brink of a nuclear war, and it is a result of the blowout of the financial system. Reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act is absolutely urgent, and people should be talking to your congressman about that. You should be telling your congressman you don't support sending billions of dollars of weapons to Nazis in Ukraine to have a nuclear war with Russia. This is not a good idea. It's already not helping our economy. It's not going to help it more. And we have to organize. And I think people will find, I'll just say one thing. When we filed the petitions, I was leaving, and there were a couple of people there, a campaign manager and a young woman running for, I believe, state senate. And her campaign manager said, "Why you over Chuck?" And I said, "Well, because I'm against nuclear war." He said, "Well, why do you say Chuck Schumer's for nuclear war?" I said, "Well, he just rammed through sending $40 billion worth of weapons to Nazis in Ukraine." And then the young lady who was the candidate said, "Yeah," she was happy that I said something that was true, that was right. And her campaign manager, and I guess that's why he's the manager, because the manager is supposed to keep the candidate out of trouble, I suppose. But at any rate, he was not so happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I also mentioned that tomorrow on the Manhattan Project show, we'll have Jerry Rose, who was one of the people very involved in your campaign, maybe a couple of other people as well, that will be discussing one element, which was this use of poetry and great literature to actually keep people motivated. Because one of the problems, of course, is that a lot of people that went out to do your petitioning, they couldn't cheat. They had to talk to all sorts of people, and that's hard work. It went on hour after hour after hour. There's a lot of rejection involved because a lot of people don't have to sign. And at night, people are coming in and sort of they feel beaten up, in one sense. You've been talking to people all day, and you find that uh, this idea of trying to convince people to do the right thing, it requires something deeper on the part of each individual going out day after day. So we'll be doing that tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I don't know if you have any comment particularly on that element, but just wanted to let people that are watching here know that tomorrow at 2, there will be more discussion of some other elements of what you were talking about and your campaign was involved in.
Great. Yes, I would really recommend people tune in to the LaRouche organization tomorrow too. Also, on June 18th and 19th, the Schiller Institute will be holding an extremely important international conference with very high level guests to discuss not merely the war danger, but what is required to get the Western world, the United States and Western Europe, to move out of this backwards, cynical, bankrupt paradigm that we have been in, dominated by the little nasty queen and her minions in the banking system, into a new paradigm, which is shaped by really what was the American Revolution, but which has now been picked up by China. What is win-win cooperation? What is their idea of allowing nations to get out of poverty? So we have to put this on the table and get more people thinking about it. So people should put aside June 18th and 19th for that conference. And as I said, we want to have a street presence with my campaign. So if you're interested in that, you want to help with that, you want to be out there organizing, talking to people, please sign up through the website and volunteer. So I think that's our conclusion.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks very much, Dennis. And thanks for watching. And I hope we'll see you next week.